My name is Michelle St. Clair and I'm an archaeologist from Berkeley, California.
My name is Alex Baer. I'm an archaeologist. I'm also from Berkeley, California.
I work for a company called Pacific Legacy, and I've been doing archaeology for the past 12 years in California.
I've been doing archaeology almost my whole life. I'm currently working on my PhD at Berkeley.
The best part of being an archaeologist is being able to travel and see different places and different landscapes.
Archaeology is great. It allows you to connect with the past in a way that really nobody else gets to. Every day is a new adventure.
I have never been to China before.
I've never been to China before.
When I hear the word China, the first thing that comes to mind are ancient cultures, of course, but secondly is food and the diversity and different types of food that are there.
When I first think of China, I think of an ancient culture that has so much rich history and so much to explore.
As an archaeologist coming from a country with over 200 years of documented history and going to a country with thousands and thousands of years of documented history, I'm very excited. I'm excited to see how deep the roots run and how far the history goes back.
We're going to Xi'an, China, the home of the Terracotta warriors. We'll be in Xi'an for about 2 weeks.
I'm really excited. I can hardly wait.
I'll see you there. The pagoda was designed to house Buddhist figurines, teachings, and even relics of the Buddha himself.
There's over 370,000 artifacts that are stored here.
The bell tower was constructed during the Ming Dynasty. We're getting there.
You're doing it.
Yes. Oh, yes. This area was used by numerous Tang emperors and high officials as a burial ground.
Banpo Neolithic village is thought to date to about 6,800 years ago.
Only discovered in 1999, the pit features a collection of 11 terracotta figures believed to be acrobats.
You have no idea of the size.
The guidebooks and the photos don't do it any justice.
Yeah.
The city of Xi'an dates back over 3,100 years, and during that time it has served as the capital city of 13 different dynasties. It's also the starting point of the Silk Road connecting Asia to the Middle East. This is our first day in Xi'an, and we were really lucky to get a chance to see 2 pretty amazing sites. In the morning, we visited Banpo Cultural Village, one of the oldest Neolithic sites in all of China. Banpo itself is a village that dates back about 6,000 years.
So the Banpo village was discovered in 1953 when there was excavations taking place for a factory that was going to be developed there. And that factory development was immediately stopped because they realized the importance of this archaeological find.
We were met by Professor Gao, one of the main archaeologists at the site of Banpo. Professor Gao led us around and showed us a lot of the insights that the archaeologists there have found over the last 50 years of work.
One of the first things that we talked about were the different structures that may have been present there at the village. Behind me you can see 2 foundations of the types of buildings that were found here in Banpo village. One is a square-shaped structure. And the other is a round structure. They're contemporaneous, they're from the same time period and actually serve the same function.
This is really interesting because in a lot of cultures, you don't often see 2 types of structures that are existing at the exact same time. Professor Gao told us that each of these had between 2 and 4 people living in them at a time. At any given time, the site of Banpo had between 300 and 400 people. But interestingly enough, that doesn't include children. This is partly because men and women did not marry as much in ancient society there.
The other interesting thing that we learned about were the different burials and the way that the burials were structured at the village.
Adults were buried on their back, often with other people in small graves. What's really interesting about this, however, is that out of the 131 burials found at the site,
women were buried together, and often they were related, sisters. Men were buried together and were brothers, but you were never to see a man and a woman being buried together. Men and women weren't really marrying, they were mating. The men were going out of the village and mating with others. The reason that the men were traveling outside of the village is because we believed that the village was one family unit, and so they couldn't intermarry.
What Professor Gao told us is that this may indicate that this was a matriarchal society in which the women actually had most of the power in the society. The women were the ones who were buried with almost all of the grave goods, including pottery and jewelry, while the men were buried with almost nothing. One of the most interesting aspects that we got to see at Banpo was houses built on top of one another. Traditionally, once a house is destroyed, you move on and put a house in a different location. But at Banpo, as we saw, houses were built directly on top of one another. That means that there's something really important to the people of Banpo about staying in the same location. As an archaeologist, this is really amazing because it allows us to see continuity in which people are continuing to stay in the same place generation after generation.
Banpo Neolithic Village is thought to date to about 6,800 years ago. And the reason that we know that is based on carbon-14 dating. And carbon-14 dating is using samples of charcoal that we find in things like hearths and fire pits that were used to cook food within these structures.
Throughout the site, both within the houses and outside of the houses, were a number of ceramic vessels. The pottery you can see behind me dates to almost 6,800 years old. It was made by hand and used to store things like water and food. It was also used as burials for children who were placed inside these jars and then buried outside the houses. Many children in Banpo didn't actually live to see adulthood. The average age at death was about 25 to 27 years old. Oftentimes, starvation and disease caused a lot of early infant mortality.
A large moat or canal was dug around the village. It was some sort of protection for the villagers to keep invaders from coming in. It was some 20 feet deep and 10 feet wide. It was pretty amazing to see the construction there.
Outside of the trench were some of the earliest fields in China. The people of Banpo began to grow millet and wheat to support their lifestyle. In addition to hunting and fishing in the local area, they also were raising pigs to supplement their diet. For archaeologists, this is an exciting kind of thing to see because it shows the transition from hunting and gathering lifestyle in which people were living in a small group, traveling frequently, and sedentary life, in which they're starting to raise crops and domesticate livestock. The entire site of Banpo covers 12.4 acres. About 2/3 of this was residential, while the outer third is all agricultural farmlands.
There were over 200 archaeologists working on the site between a period of 3 to 4 years. There were some 50 archaeologists working at the site during one day. Normally in the United States, we're more often doing what we call testing, where we look at a little spot here and a little spot there and don't really get to see the entire extent of a site. So for this amount to be exposed and for people to be able to see it and research it is just amazing.
According to Professor Gao, there's still a lot of work to be done at this site, and there's a lot more to be learned. So by saving a large portion of this for future archaeologists, they've done a really smart thing. They've allowed people in the future with better technology a chance to come back someday and really learn a whole lot more about Banpo. In the afternoon, we visited Daming Palace,
which was discovered in the 1950s.
The capital for over 200 years of the Tang Dynasty. Construction on Daming Palace began in 634 CE by the first Tang emperor. It took over 74 years to be completed, but by the end, the entire area covered over a square mile.
When we arrived in the afternoon, we caught a glimpse of this large structure which housed the foundations of the Dafeng Gate, which was the access point to the Daming Palace. These foundations have been preserved in the building, and they're quite interesting because they are massive in size. The Tang Dynasty is a time of great wealth, and it's also a time of great pride for the Chinese today. The construction of the Daming Palace was a period that opened up a new architectural style in Chinese building, and this was pervasive after this time period. It was more of an opulent type of architecture that was more splendid and more rich.
Next, we visited the Han Yuan Hall.
It was a place where a lot of political negotiations were taking place.
This is a replica built over the original site to protect it. The casing around the site allows for the preservation on the inside of the original palace structure. The only original piece left is one large carved stone at the very top.
I have to just say that today has been amazing. As an archaeologist, I am just thrilled to see this level of history and how far it goes back and how well things are preserved here. I'm so excited to see what tomorrow holds for us.
This morning we visited the Forest of Stone Stelae, known as Beilin in Chinese. This complex held a number of stone stelae, which are tablets carved with writings.
We walked into an open-air courtyard. It was quite beautiful, and I was struck by the peacefulness of it and the openness of the area.
We walked down a beautiful pathway lined with trees to meet our guide, Will.
The first thing that he let us know was that this was originally established as a temple to honor Confucius.
The museum houses over 3,500 stone tablets, of which about 1,000 are on display at any given time.
The first display room that we walked into, Display Room 1, had numerous different stone steles made out of limestone.
The entire room contains the 12 books of Confucian doctrine on a number of stone tablets, dating well back over 1,000 years.
We were told that it took 10 to 20 years to practice the craft to be able to actually make these steles.
These tablets had to be memorized by ancient officials who needed to know them inside and out if they wanted to really work in the government.
One of the interesting teachings that we learned about was to learn and to practice what you learn. It was a teaching of Confucianism that was written down on one of the stele tablets that we looked at.
The second room we visited featured mainly texts on historical documents.
One of the steles that was found there was told to us to be one of the 4 most important stone tablets with religious text in the world.
The Nestorian tablet tells the story of early Syrian monks who came to China and brought Christianity.
This tablet had translations of the Bible into Chinese.
The third room we visited focuses mostly on different styles of writing.
There was the traditional Chinese characters,
including the calligraphy style, the general characters.
But there was also another form of writing which is called seal script.
This script dates around to the time of the Terracotta warriors and is one of the earliest forms of writing in China.
It really looked interesting to me, almost like a hieroglyphic that you would see in Egyptian culture. Not many people know what these actually mean, even in modern day Chinese culture.
It's kind of cool as an archaeologist to actually be able to see the evolution of writing from the earliest time period up to what we use today. Each of these limestone tablets was hand-carved using a chisel and hammer. This particular tablet features a calligraphy style by the most famous Chinese calligrapher, Wang Shizhi. It features nearly 2,000 characters and took almost 24 years to complete.
The final exhibit hall that we walked into, display room 4, held the most modern of the steles that we saw today.
These are more pictures. It's really exciting to see this shift away from purely writing to a more artistic sort of expression. We're at the Big Wild Goose Pagoda, which is as symbolic to Xi'an as the Golden Gate Bridge is to San Francisco.
It's 7 stories tall and 210 feet high.
And we're climbing all the way to the top. The Big Wild Goose Pagoda is located about 2.5 miles south of the old city center. Originally built in 652 CE during the Tang Dynasty, the pagoda was designed to house Buddhist figurines, teachings, and even relics of the Buddha himself. All of these were collected by the monk Xuanzang, whose travels throughout Asia lasted 17 years, predominantly in India, in which he spent time collecting things all related to Buddhism. Following his travels, Xuanzang returned to Xi'an and presented everything he had found to the Emperor Gaozong. Gaozong was so impressed with all the things that had been returned that he commissioned the construction of this pagoda.
Originally, the structure was 5 stories tall, about 174 feet high. At the end of the reign of Empress Wu, 5 more stories were added to the pagoda, giving it a sharper, more pointed form than it has today. It was probably damaged by fire, and it was reduced to 7 stories as it currently stands.
Michelle and I climbed all 7 stories to the very top of the pagoda.
We climbed the wooden staircases and stopped periodically at the different floors.
Each of the floors housed different things, including relics of the Buddha.
When we got to the top of the 7 stories, there was a spectacular view.
Looking